Hey everybody, welcome back to mdo204. This is class 2. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last class and finalize our textures for the Earth. So let's hop right into Modo and get started. Alright, so here we are inside of Modo, back in our project. And where we left off, we had the Earth texture laid down. We laid down the cloud texture. We didn't touch the atmosphere yet, and I have that turned off for right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start with the atmosphere and work my way back down. I'm just going to enable this layer, and I can just click on it in the viewport, and you can see that it'll pull up the material here for this layer. And I'm going to come over and I'm going to add a layer, come to processing, and choose gradient. So now what this is going to do is this is going to give me a gradient, and I can base this gradient off of many different things. By default, it's incidence angle, and that's actually what we want, but I'll just show you that you can choose many different parameters for your gradient and where you want or how you want it to calculate. Sample parameters is going to have a lot of the other uses that I use gradient for, which a lot of these are really powerful and will create some cool results. But since I actually want the default, which is incident, I'm going to leave it. So what I can do is I can either middle mouse click down here, which will set down a point, and I can drag this point around. But I find it easier to work with a full size gradient, so I can just click edit gradient. And that'll bring up my gradient editor. And you'll notice that by default the RGBs are selected, so I can select a point and start choosing the color that I want, and immediately you'll see that it'll color this based on the incidence angle. So we're getting no color in the middle and heavy color on the edges, and then I can come in and pull this point and adjust how I want this to work. So you can kind of see what we're starting to do now. So I'm going to pull this into an appropriate area. I'm not going to worry about the color just yet. And I'm going to pull this back. Maybe something like there for now. We're just going to try to get a general sense of the fall off and how we want our atmosphere to kind of wrap around the corner or the edges here of our planet. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zoom in on this edge here. If you're familiar with Modo, you know that the shader tree works from the bottom up. So we have a base material that's affecting everything, and then it hits this new material which is wrapped to this Earth tag right here, which is affecting only this set of polygons, vice versa, all the way up. And we can add in individual shaders to these individual tags right here, and quite a bit of flexibility that we can use to control and texture our images. So here in our atmosphere we have a gradient that's affecting the diffuse color. So this is going to affect the color based off of the incidence angle. So if I select this, move this over to a little bit more of a blue and less purple, and then select this right here, we can change the color of fall off based on the incidence angle. So if I bring this in a little bit, you can see how it's starting to change how that fall off of the incidence angle is coloring these two keyframes. So I can select this, I can make it go from blue to green. You get the idea. So this is pretty powerful how we can affect this. So I'm going to leave it here for now. I'm going to close this out, come back to that angle there, and I'm going to add another gradient, and this time I'm going to set this one to transparent amount, and immediately you see that it completely disappears. But under value this time, if I edit my gradient, I'm going to add a keyframe on the other side. I'm just going to select it and put this to 100. So it's not going any more than 100%. And that's important, and I'll show you why here in a second. Middle mouse click and add another one here, and actually pull this down. You'll see that we start to have an atmosphere. So basically what this is doing is at the center, we'll just select this. At input 0%, the value is 100%. And at, we'll just put this to 50, make it a nice even center. And we're going to drag this down to 0. So it's going from 100, 0, 100, at position 0, 50, 100. So we can start to see what's happening here. And if I middle mouse click, add a few more key points, and drag these up to get a little bit nicer of a fall off, we can grab these tangent handles and drag it around, get the look we need or want. We can see what's starting to happen. And if I zoom in on this, we can see that we have a nice halo on the incidence angle, and we can see that it's too far inwards. So I can select all of these keyframes, and I'm just going to use this little miniature dope sheet down here and drag this over. We can start to see how we're pulling that back towards the edge. And this is why I said this was important, that this is at 100%. Let me zoom in here and show you what starts to happen. So right now the fall off is happening and going to the very edge of this geo. If we were to drag this point past, it's going to create a hard edge, because at 100%, that's at the very edge of our geo. So now we're actually pulling this value past the edge of that geo, which is not what we want. And in fact, I'd argue that we'd want this to be slightly inside the edge of our geo, so it falls off just before it hits the edge. And I'm going to pull this value in a little bit, create a little bit more of a fall off. And if we zoom in, we should start to see stars showing through the very edge of this fall off here. So from here, it's just a matter of dialing it in to what we think looks the best, or however technically accurate we want to make this. And what I mean by that is, obviously, if this was a different planet or an alien planet that no one's ever visited, we don't know what the atmosphere looks like. So we can really just do whatever we want. But I would always recommend looking at reference photos and dialing this in to be whatever you need it to be. And the cool thing is this is all live, and since it's going from bottom up, we could come in here and pull this around, and we can start to see some of those values come in at the very end there. Make it really sharp. I'm going to just hit A to reframe this, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So it's going from the darker atmosphere to a slightly lighter atmosphere, and I can drag this around to get the look and the fall off feel of our diffuse, and then come back to our gradient and really fine tune how we want this to be. I can select multiple keyframes, drag them over, select just this guy. So I'm going to leave this up to you to play around with your atmosphere to get the look and feel that you want. So what I'm going to do now is just hop right on down to the clouds, and we're gonna find a good place to work on our clouds here. Let me find a good area of cloud. This looks good. So right now we have our material. We have our cloud map we set to RGBA. That we used our cloud map also to be the transparent amount. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to right click and duplicate this one more time, and then set this to surface shading bump. So now with this set to bump, it's using the black and white values to put some bump into our clouds. Let me find a better area of cloud to work on. This looks good. So now we have a bump map for our clouds, and we know that this texture has black and white values. So I can come to my material here and start to pull up on our bump amplitude. And you should see, if I pull it way up, we can start to see a lot of bump happening on the clouds here. And this is just an extreme example. Probably should spend a second here and find a good angle. I think this is good. So this is obviously a very extreme example. So let's pull this down a little bit. Even more. I think that's good. For visualization, I'm going to actually turn off our atmosphere and then probably turn off our earth layer as well, just for the time being. And actually, something that will really help our cloud layer is we don't want this specular spot. So I'm going to just come to specular and turn this down to 0. And actually, that's much nicer. We would never get a specular highlight like that. So now I can come back and adjust the bump on my clouds. We're pretty far zoomed in here, so this isn't an extremely high-res texture, so you can start to see it breaks apart a little bit. I'm going to pull that back just a little bit. But you can start to see, without it, you would get none of this shadowing here. So if I were to turn this down to 0, it becomes really flat. And if I pull that back up, we get a lot of this nice bump material here. And when we zoom back out, we can start to see it's affecting everything. So let me zero that out for you guys one more time. No ridges, no density or volumetric depth to the cloud. Pull that up, and we're starting to see ridges and bump and stuff happening. And from a distance, it looks really good, especially if we turn our earth back on. And it starts to give us a lot of, especially on these over here where the sun would just be catching the edges of the clouds over here. So that's really nice to be able to dial that in. This is flat or almost like milky looking. Obviously adding some volume to that looks a lot nicer. So just dial that in to whatever you guys feel is right. These are arbitrary numbers. Obviously 20 feet is way different from what the actual real world values would be. We did not make the Earth to scale, so I'm not worried about this. Just dial in the bump amplitude for the clouds to where you get it to where you think it's looking right. And we turn our atmosphere back on, and we can start to see things taking shape. However, there is this looming specular highlight in the middle of our Earth layer. So under atmosphere, I'm going to make sure that we turn down our specular amount, and we still have this specular highlight hitting the Earth, which is technically not accurate. So I'm going to show you guys another website that's a good resource and reference for images. We have celestiamotherlode.net. And if we come here, if we just go to the main page, we can see that we have solar system, we have Earth, and we have all of these different maps under Earth. So I'm going to click on Bump, Normal, and Spec Maps. And here we have tons of really, really high-res spec maps. We have bump maps, normal maps, and such that we can use for our Earth textures. I'm going to recommend that you do not use 32K textures unless if you have a monster machine and a render farm, because it will really eat up your resources. So I'm just going to download this 2K, 4K, and 8K PNG, and then I'm going to bring it into my clip bin. I'm going to navigate to where I put the PNG and click open. And then I'm going to drag this into my world texture here. And we can see what it's doing, which is not what we want it to be doing at the moment. We actually want to set this to specular amount, so we're going to come over to basic. And we can see it's immediately better, but since this actually has an alpha channel in the PNG, we're going to come to alpha channel ignore. So now we only have the specularity happening on the water of the Earth, which is what we want. So we can come to material now, and we can start to dial in some things here under specular amount. But what I'm going to do before we do that is I'm going to come to our specular amount image map, and I'm actually going to clip the high value here. So I'm going to set this to 50 just for right now. Maybe actually set that down to 40. And then I'm going to come back to the material. And keep in mind, this map is only affecting our specular amount. We still have control over things like Fresnel, specular color. Maybe I'm just going to give this a subtle blue tint, very subtle. We still have control over our roughness, all of our different settings here. So I'm just going to play around with this. Just going to play around with this until I get it somewhere where I think it looks what I want for our specular amount. And keep in mind, I can always come back to the specular amount and start adjusting these even further. So it's kind of like a give and take to figure out what we want and where we want it. Find a nice balance here. You guys can basically see what the setup is here and how to adjust it. So between the specular amount map and the material, we have a lot of flexibility to dial it in how we want it. And once again, I'd always recommend looking at reference, depending on what you're going for. Obviously, if this is an alien world, you're just going to dial it in until you get the look that you want. Something like that actually looks kind of nice. But I'll let you guys dial this in to get the look and feel that you want. So we can see our Earth is actually starting to take shape, which is really nice. So one other thing I want to do, and as compositors, you guys are going to love this, we have a schematic view where we can actually create nodes and hook up a system to create textures in our shading tree. And if you are a compositor and you think in nodes, you're going to love this. So let's Let's go to the Earth now and create a map that shows the night lights, but only where the light is not hitting. So we're not going to have that texture show up here. We're going to get the nice night light area where it's completely dark. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So what I've done is centered my Earth in an area where there's going to be lights across the dark and light area. And I've brought in my night Earth map that I've downloaded, and I'm going to just drag that into my Earth area here. And I'm going to set this to luminance color and make sure my luminance intensity is set to 1. And I've already gone ahead and pre-made a color palette that I thought looked nice for the Earth lights. But we can see right now it's across the whole thing. So this is what I love about Modo and as a compositor using nodes. I can drag this material right into my schematic view, and if there's a channel that I want to affect that is not here, I can simply select that channel and I can click Add Selected. Likewise, I could simply right click and add channel to schematic. So the other thing I can do is the directional light, just drag that right in, and you can start to see how this is going to be very, very powerful. I also have this add button here, which will give me a whole bunch of other things that we could put into our schematic view. One of them is going to be illuminate, and you can see that this comes pre-hooked up with shader inputs coming into our position. And actually it's really not that difficult from here to finish. Our directional light comes into our light, and for right now we're going to do luminance into luminance intensity. And we can see that this is cutting off the wrong side of what we want. It's only showing this luminance color based on the luminance intensity, but that's pretty easy because we can come in and go to channel modifier, color invert. Let me zoom out here, and I can plug this into color invert to our input color, and on our output color, luminance intensity. And here it is completely switched, so it's only showing the lights where the Earth does not have any sunlight on it. And since this is all live and hooked up, there's a lot of other factors that we can change. Just to show you what else this does, if I click shadow, it's basically swapping it as well, but I don't want to do that, and I'll show you why here in a second. We also have shaded luminance, which is, it's still going to put this in the fall off of the shading of the shadows. And obviously that might be nice if we want, you know, maybe some people are turning on their lights at night, but obviously this is way too strong, so we're just going to put that back to luminance. So now we only have that where luminance is showing. So the cool thing about nodes is one of the things that we could do is we could come in and come to channel modifier math, and I'm just going to select add for right now, and this is going to add an A and a B side and come out. So if I select this and connect it to the A side and select the output to intensity, we can then, with this math node selected, which is add, we can drag the B value down, which is going to reduce the intensity of the lights that we have here. And we can see that this is showing up, and it's actually taking away, it's subtracting 0.68 from a value of 1. So you can see how this starts to work. If we're not subtracting anything away or have a negative value here, then it's just going to be left the same. So this is a nice way to give yourself some control here between operations. So I'm actually happy with how this has turned out. One thing I might want to do is be able to change the fall off of the Earth a little bit less of a hard line. We're going to come over to directional light, and I'm going to uncheck simple shading, change the spread angle to 180, and what this does now is gives us a much softer fall off, but now we can see our values here are getting pushed back. So what I could do is change this to shaded luminance, which is going to push that back into the fall off there. Or I could add another math operation. So this math operation right here is between our luminance and our color invert. And what that's basically doing is we can now dial in where we want that fall off to start happening. And that's an easy way where we can actually allow for a nice smoother fall off on our Earth, and actually control where the Earth lights are going to start hitting or start turning on within this fall off. So let's turn all of our layers back on and start to look at what we have here. So just to recap on the schematic here, we have a directional light plugged into an illuminate node. From the luminance, we're using a math add operation, which is taking the A and B side and outputting a value, and we're using this to dial in where the fall off starts to happen. Without this node, it basically gets pushed back. We took our directional light, we did a nice softer spread angle on this light, we turned off simple shading, so we get a really nice fall off here. We have a color invert node happening, so we're basically, instead of showing the nighttime lights where the light is hitting, we're inverting it to show it where it's not hitting. And then that's plugged into our luminance intensity of our material here. So if we spin around, we should see no lights on the areas that the sun is hitting. So you can start to see with all of these large heavy textures how this starts to slow down our viewport. One of the things you might want to do is just come back to your model and come over to your camera mode, and I'm actually going to turn off atmosphere so we can start to see a little bit of what's happening here. And I'm going to turn off clouds too and just look at our Earth map here. And I'm going to hit Control 1 and toggle our lights. Okay, our light is still in the center of our Earth, and that's going to get confusing because we're not going to be able to see it if it is hidden inside of geometry. So now we can control our light and kind of where we want to shine it. Let's actually bring it over this way. So this is acting as our sun right now. One other thing I want to mention is I am running moving around in camera view. That's probably not the best practice because you can accidentally screw up your camera view. So one thing you might want to do is under camera, we can lock it or unlock it, and I would only unlock it and unlock it after you're done positioning it. So Let's say we want to set up our shot like this. Something like this maybe. So let's get more of the sun coming over the horizon here. Maybe something like that. We could then come and lock our camera. So now I can't scroll around, which is really good. It forces us to work in perspective view, so we're not destroying where our camera was. So we can turn these back on, come over to render, which is now going to show us our scene because we have this set to our camera view. And we can't scroll around, the camera is locked, and this is a really good way to work and make sure that we're not screwing up our camera. Now is a good time to save. I'm going to save this. So now that we have this all set up, I think this is a good stopping point. Once you have your image like it is, we can dial in all sorts of stuff. We could come to our atmosphere and resize the geo, or we could just simply come to the transparent amount and pull these values even further inward if we don't want this thick of a atmosphere. The cool thing about this is it's all live, so we just figure what way we want to work and start pushing and pulling those values from there to dial this in. If we want to pull back some of these nighttime lights, we know that we have this node right here, which we can slide these values closer to 0, which is going to pull that back even further. All sorts of flexibility that we have right now. So we covered the atmosphere, dialing in our clouds, adding the nighttime lights to the schematic view. A lot of really cool, powerful stuff. And this, guys, this is just scratching the surface of what you can do with node-based materials. I mean, you have so many different options and things that you can come in and do to modify all of your different channels. You can affect all of your different channels within your materials, and it's really, really powerful. So I hope you guys enjoyed this class. Next class, we're going to set up all of our different render options and render layers so we can bring this inside of Nuke, and then we're going to final the image. I'll just tell you right now, one of the things that we're going to want to do, make sure that global illumination is off, because we are only using the one light as our source of light. Not that we'd have anything over here that would be bouncing back into these dark areas. Possibly the moon, but we don't need to calculate it that crazy for what we're doing here. It might only add nominal results, if any, so no biggie. But I will see you guys in the next class, and look forward to seeing your works in progress in the forums. I hope you guys enjoyed everything, and I will see you in the next class. Take care.